My name is Daniel Harris, and I've been a detective for nearly 15 years. I've seen a lot in my career, but nothing has ever haunted me quite like the case of Rebecca Sullivan. It all began on a crisp October morning when I was called to a scene that defied logic and explanation. Rebecca Sullivan was found in her small, two-bedroom apartment in a state that sent shivers down my spine. Her body was burnt beyond recognition, yet her surroundings remained eerily untouched. The bed she lay in was perfectly intact, and the only remnants of her were charred bones and ashes. Her limbs were mysteriously untouched, almost as if the fire had selectively devoured her torso and left the rest. As I stood in her bedroom, the scene didn't make sense. There was no trace of an external source of ignition, no candles, no cigarettes, no faulty wiring. It was as if Rebecca had spontaneously combusted. The air was thick with the scent of burnt flesh, a smell that would cling to my memory for years to come. We began the investigation by interviewing Rebecca's friends and family. They described her as a bright, lively woman in her mid-30s with no known enemies or significant health issues. Rebecca worked as a librarian, spending most of her time surrounded by books and the soft whisper of turning pages. Her life was quiet and uneventful, making her sudden and inexplicable death even more baffling. We scoured her apartment for clues, but everything seemed normal. There were no signs of forced entry, no indications of foul play. The forensic team was equally stumped. The burn pattern on Rebecca's body didn't match any known accelerants, and the intensity of the fire seemed far too concentrated to be natural. The media caught wind of the unusual nature of Rebecca's death, and soon, the phrase spontaneous human combustion was being thrown around in headlines. It was a theory that many dismissed as pseudoscience, yet here I was, faced with a case that seemed to support it. Desperate for answers, I delved into the history of spontaneous human combustion, discovering that it was not a new phenomenon. There were accounts dating back centuries, each describing similar circumstances: victims found reduced to ashes with no apparent source of ignition, their limbs and surroundings eerily unscathed. I reached out to Dr. Evelyn Baker, a forensic pathologist with a keen interest in unexplained phenomena. Dr. Baker had studied several cases of spontaneous human combustion and agreed to assist with the investigation. Together, we re-examined the evidence, looking for any overlooked details that might explain Rebecca's tragic end. As Dr. Baker and I dug deeper, we discovered a chilling pattern. Rebecca was not the first victim in the area. Over the past decade, there had been 3 other cases with strikingly similar circumstances. All were women in their 30s, all found burned to death in their homes with no external source of ignition. We began to suspect that these cases were connected, but the lack of physical evidence made it difficult to prove. The victims had no apparent links to each other, no common acquaintances, no similar professions, no shared locations. It was as if they were chosen at random, consumed by an invisible fire that left no trace of its origin. One night, as I pored over the case files in my dimly lit office, I received a call from a woman named Sarah Mitchell. Her voice trembled as she described a harrowing experience from several months earlier. She had awoken in the middle of the night to find her body inexplicably hot, as if she were burning from the inside out. Panicked, she had rushed to the bathroom and doused herself with cold water, which seemed to stave off the burning sensation. Sarah was terrified that she might become the next victim. She revealed that she had recently started experiencing strange episodes: unexplained fevers, sudden dizziness, and an odd tingling sensation in her extremities. Her symptoms mirrored those reported by the other victims in the weeks leading up to their deaths. Intrigued by Sarah's account, I decided to investigate further. I delved into Rebecca's background, looking for any signs of unusual behavior or recent changes in her life. It was then that I stumbled upon something peculiar. Rebecca had recently joined a local group that dabbled in occult practices. The group was led by a man named Victor Crowley, a charismatic figure with a reputation for delving into the dark arts. I arranged to meet with Victor, hoping to uncover any connections between his group and the mysterious deaths. Victor greeted me with a disarming smile, his eyes glinting with an unsettling intensity. He spoke of the group's rituals, which he claimed were meant to harness hidden energies within the human body. According to Victor, these rituals could amplify a person's life force, but if performed incorrectly, they could have catastrophic consequences. As I delved deeper into the group's activities, I uncovered a disturbing truth. Victor's rituals were not just harmless experiments, they were a dangerous manipulation of forces beyond human understanding. The victims, including Rebecca, had unknowingly participated in these rituals, which had somehow triggered a fatal reaction within their bodies. The rituals involved a complex series of chants, symbols, and movements designed to awaken a latent energy within the participants. However, something had gone horribly wrong. Instead of empowering the individuals, the rituals had ignited a destructive force within them, leading to their spontaneous combustion. Armed with this knowledge, I confronted Victor, hoping to get a confession or at least a clearer explanation. Victor remained calm, denying any wrongdoing and insisting that the deaths were merely unfortunate accidents. However, the glint in his eyes suggested otherwise. Desperate to prevent another tragedy, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I warned Sarah about the dangers of the rituals and urged her to cut all ties with the group. She agreed, but the fear in her eyes told me that she knew the threat was far from over. One stormy night, I received a frantic call from Sarah. She had experienced another burning sensation, more intense than before, and was convinced that her time was running out. I rushed to her apartment, praying that I wasn't too late. When I arrived, the air was thick with an oppressive heat. Sarah lay on the floor, her body engulfed in an eerie, blue flame that seemed to emanate from within. I watched in horror as the fire consumed her, leaving nothing but ashes and untouched limbs. Sarah's death marked the end of my investigation, but the questions remained. Victor Crowley vanished without a trace, leaving behind a legacy of fear and unanswered questions. The phenomenon of spontaneous human combustion continued to baffle experts, defying scientific explanation. I resigned from the force shortly after, unable to shake the horrors I had witnessed. The case of Rebecca Sullivan and the others haunted my dreams, a chilling reminder of the unknown forces that lurk in the shadows of our reality. Even now, years later, I can't help but wonder if there are others out there, unknowingly playing with forces beyond their control. And I fear that one day the fire might come for me. My name is Alex Turner, and I moved to Taos, New Mexico, seeking peace and tranquility. The small town, nestled in the high desert, promised a slower pace of life, away from the constant noise and chaos of the city. Little did I know that Taos held a secret, one that would shatter my sanity and leave me questioning reality itself. It started subtly at first, a barely noticeable hum that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. I first heard it one quiet evening while sitting on my porch, sipping a cup of coffee. It was a low-frequency sound, like a distant engine idling, persistent and unyielding. At first, I dismissed it as a product of my imagination, or perhaps the wind playing tricks on me. Days turned into weeks, and the hum became a constant presence in my life. It was there when I woke up, accompanied me throughout my day, and lulled me to a restless sleep at night. No matter where I went in Taos, the sound followed, a relentless companion that refused to be ignored. I began asking around, hoping to find someone who could explain the mysterious noise. To my surprise, many of the locals were familiar with the hum. They spoke of it in hushed tones, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and resignation. Some claimed it had been there for years, while others insisted it was a recent phenomenon. No one knew its source, but everyone agreed on one thing: the hum was driving people to madness. The more I listened to the hum, the more it consumed me. It infiltrated my thoughts, making it impossible to concentrate on anything else. I became irritable and paranoid, convinced that the sound was somehow alive, watching and waiting. Sleep became a distant memory as the hum grew louder and more insistent, a ceaseless drone that echoed through my mind. I wasn't alone in my suffering. The residents of Taos were slowly unraveling, their lives disrupted by the omnipresent noise. People who had lived in the town for generations were packing up and leaving, unable to bear the constant torment. Those who remained were like ghosts, their eyes hollow and their faces gaunt, haunted by the inescapable hum. Desperate for answers, I turned to Dr. Emily Carter, a sound engineer who had studied the Taos hum extensively. She welcomed me into her home, her eyes betraying a weariness that spoke of years spent battling the elusive noise. The hum is a low-frequency sound, she explained, her voice barely audible over the persistent drone. It's been reported in various parts of the world, but Taos is one of the most infamous cases. We've tried everything: acoustic measurements, electromagnetic tests, even geological surveys, but we can't pinpoint its source. Dr. Carter showed me her equipment, a collection of sophisticated devices designed to detect and analyze sound waves. Despite her best efforts, the hum remained an enigma, a mystery that defied scientific explanation. As the months passed, the hum began to change. It grew more complex, fluctuating in pitch and intensity, as if responding to my thoughts and emotions. It seemed to mock me, whispering dark secrets and planting seeds of doubt in my mind. I started to see shadows in the corners of my vision, flickering shapes that vanished when I turned to look. One night, unable to bear the torment any longer, I ventured into the desert, hoping to escape the hum's relentless grasp. The air was cool and still, the stars shining brightly overhead. For a moment, I thought I had found peace. But then the hum returned, louder and more insistent than ever, a deep, resonant thrum that seemed to emanate from the very earth beneath my feet. I fell to my knees, clutching my head as the sound burrowed into my skull, driving me to the brink of insanity. In that moment of utter despair, I realized the horrifying truth: the hum wasn't just a sound. It was alive, a malevolent entity that fed on fear and suffering, and it had chosen me as its next victim. I returned to town, my mind shattered and my spirit broken. The hum was relentless, a constant presence that gnawed at my sanity. I knew I couldn't stay in Taos any longer. The only way to escape the torment was to leave, to put as much distance between myself and the source of the hum as possible. I packed my belongings and bid farewell to the friends I had made, their faces etched with the same haunted look I had come to recognize in my own reflection. As I drove away from Taos, the hum began to fade, replaced by the silence of the open road. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. I settled in a small town far from Taos, hoping to rebuild my life and find some semblance of normalcy. The hum was gone, but its memory lingered, a dark shadow that haunted my every thought. I spent my days in a daze, unable to shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the hum was still out there, waiting for me. I reached out to Dr. Carter, hoping for some closure. She had continued her research, driven by a need to understand the hum and its origins. Her latest findings were unsettling. I believe the hum is a manifestation of something far more sinister than we ever imagined, she said, her voice trembling. It's not just a sound, it's a presence, an entity that feeds on our fear and despair. As I struggled to rebuild my life, I couldn't shake the feeling that the hum was still with me, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. I began to hear faint echoes of the sound, a distant whisper that grew louder with each passing day. It was as if the hum had followed me, a malevolent force that refused to let me go. One night I awoke to find my room bathed in an eerie, pulsating light. The hum was back, louder and more insistent than ever. It filled the room, vibrating through the walls and floor, seeping into my very bones. I realized with a growing sense of dread that there was no escape. The hum had chosen me, and it would never let me go. As I lay there paralyzed by fear, the shadows in the corners of the room began to move, coalescing into a dark, shapeless form. It moved towards me, a writhing mass of darkness and sound, whispering secrets that no human should ever hear. The hum was not just a sound, it was a gateway, a conduit for something ancient and malevolent that had been awakened by our presence. I don't know how much time passed as I lay there, trapped in a nightmare of sound and shadow. The hum grew louder, a deafening roar that drowned out my thoughts and filled my mind with darkness. I could feel it consuming me, feeding on my fear and despair, pulling me deeper into its grasp. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the hum stopped. The shadows receded, leaving me alone in the silence of my room. I was free, but I knew that the hum was still out there, waiting for its next victim. I left Taos behind, but the memory of the hum still haunts me. It is a reminder that there are forces in this world that we cannot understand, ancient and malevolent entities that lurk in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. And as I lie awake at night, I can still hear the faint echo of the hum, a distant whisper that reminds me that I will never truly be free. My name is James Blackwood, and I've lived in the quiet village of Exmouth in Devon, England, all my life. Winters here are usually mild, with only the occasional light snowfall dusting the countryside. However, the winter of Devon was different. It was a harsh season, marked by relentless storms that blanketed the village in a thick layer of snow. One particularly fierce storm struck in early February, leaving the entire region immobilized. For days, we were cut off from the rest of the world, our quaint village buried under several feet of snow. The storm raged on, and we huddled indoors, waiting for the weather to clear. When the storm finally passed, we awoke to a pristine, white landscape. The morning was still and quiet, the air crisp with the lingering chill of the storm. It was then that the first whispers of something strange began to spread through the village. My neighbor, Thomas, was the first to notice it. He came to my door, his face pale and eyes wide with fear. "James, you need to see this," he said, his voice trembling. "There are footprints in the snow, strange ones." Curiosity piqued, I followed him outside. The scene that greeted me was unlike anything I had ever seen. Imprinted in the snow were a series of hoof-like prints, perfectly spaced and stretching as far as the eye could see. The tracks were bizarre, too narrow to be made by any known animal, and too deep for a person to have created them without disturbing the surrounding snow. Word of the mysterious footprints spread quickly, and soon the entire village was abuzz with speculation. The tracks seemed to defy logic and explanation. They passed through walls, over rooftops, and even across rivers without breaking stride. There were no signs of entry or exit, just a continuous line of hoof-like marks that seemed to appear out of nowhere. As the village constable, it was my duty to investigate. Armed with a lantern and accompanied by Thomas and a few other curious villagers, I set out to follow the trail. We trudged through the snow, our breath visible in the frigid air, as we traced the footprints across fields, through dense woods, and over fences. The tracks never wavered, maintaining their eerie consistency throughout. The deeper we ventured into the countryside, the more unsettling the situation became. The footprints crossed barriers that should have been impossible to navigate. They went straight up the sides of buildings, through locked gates, and even over the icy surface of a frozen pond without breaking the thin ice. It was as if the creature responsible for these tracks could move through solid objects at will. We reached a secluded clearing in the woods, where the footprints abruptly ended. There were no signs of an animal or person, no indication of where the tracks might have led. It was as if the creature had vanished into thin air. We stood there in silence, the cold seeping into our bones as a sense of dread settled over us. Back in the village, the footprints became the talk of the town. Speculation ran wild, with theories ranging from the supernatural to the absurd. Some claimed it was the work of a mischievous prankster, while others whispered of dark rituals and ancient curses. The most unsettling theory, however, came from the village's oldest resident, Mrs. Hargrove. "It's the devil," she said, her voice a hoarse whisper. "The devil walks among us, marking his territory. Those are his footprints." Mrs. Hargrove's words sent a chill down my spine. The idea seemed preposterous, yet the evidence was undeniable. The footprints were unlike anything we had ever seen, and their appearance had coincided with the strange events that had plagued the village since the storm. In the days that followed, strange occurrences began to plague the village. Doors slammed shut on their own, windows shattered without warning, and eerie whispers could be heard in the dead of night. Livestock went missing, and the villagers reported seeing shadowy figures lurking in the darkness. I found myself waking in the middle of the night, heart pounding, convinced that something was watching me. The air seemed to crackle with an unseen energy, and a pervasive sense of dread hung over the village. The footprints had stirred something ancient and malevolent, and its presence was growing stronger by the day. Determined to put an end to the madness, I gathered a group of men from the village. Armed with torches and weapons, we set out into the woods, following the trail of the footprints once more. As we ventured deeper into the forest, the air grew colder, and an unnatural silence enveloped us. We reached the clearing where the footprints had previously ended. The snow was undisturbed, but an eerie glow emanated from the ground. As we stood there, the temperature dropped suddenly, and a dense fog began to roll in, obscuring our vision. A figure emerged from the fog, tall and shadowy, with eyes that glowed like embers. It moved with an unnatural grace, its hoof-like feet leaving no mark on the snow. The men around me gasped in terror, some dropping their torches and fleeing into the night. I stood my ground, clutching my lantern. as the figure approached. "You should not have come here," it said, its voice a low, rumbling growl. "This land is mine." I felt a wave of fear wash over me, but I forced myself to speak. "What do you want? Why are you here?" The figure laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the clearing. "I am here to remind you of your place, to show you that there are forces in this world beyond your comprehension. Leave this place and never return." With that, the figure vanished, leaving me alone in the clearing. The fog lifted and the temperature began to rise. I stumbled back to the village, my mind racing with what I had just witnessed. The other men who had fled were nowhere to be seen, and I could only hope they had made it back safely. In the days that followed, the strange occurrences in the village ceased. The footprints gradually faded, and the sense of dread that had hung over us began to lift. The villagers went about their lives, grateful for the return to normalcy, but the memory of that night remained etched in our minds. I never spoke of the encounter in the clearing, but I knew that the devil's footprints had left a permanent mark on our village. We had been reminded of our insignificance in the face of ancient and powerful forces, and the fear of the unknown lingered in the shadows. Years have passed since that fateful winter, but I still find myself waking in the middle of the night, haunted by the memory of those glowing eyes and the chilling voice. The footprints may have vanished, but their presence remains, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond the edges of our understanding. As I sit by the fire, writing this account, I can hear the wind howling outside, a storm brewing on the horizon. I know that the devil's footprints could appear again, and that when they do, we must be ready. For there are forces in this world that we cannot see or understand, and they are always watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. And when that moment comes, we must remember the lesson of that winter, that some things are best left undisturbed, and that the devil's footprints are a warning we would do well to heed. If you want to see more horror stories, please like the video, share your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel. Stay with us, thank you, and see you in the next videos.